Welcome, industry colleagues, and thank you for joining today's webinar entitled Optimize Resources for a Successful Product Launch. This is Anthony Williamson, Director of Business Development. Today's presenter is Lori Peters, Senior Vice President of Commercial Operations. Some background on QPharma. We've been around for more than 20 years providing regulatory compliance and commercial services to the life sciences industry. Relative to today's topic, our product launch solution has supported more than 40 brand teams with more than 300 launch plans globally in 12 therapeutic areas and more than 25 indications. So thanks again for taking the time to attend as well as your participation. This is an interactive session. We encourage you to participate by using the Q&A feature located on the Zoom menu bar. If you submit questions during the presentation, they'll only be received by today's presenter and then reviewed and incorporated into today's conversation. So enjoy the presentation. Now to Lori.
Thank you, Anthony. Welcome everyone to our session today. What we're really going to be sharing with you are some of our best practices, as Anthony mentioned, that we have gathered and refined over the last 15 plus years with the multitude of launches that we've executed. What we really try to do is find the best way that you can execute a standard repeatable process, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So when we're engaging with our clients and we're talking to them about their current launch experience, one of the things we really ask them first is, what has been that launch experience? Can you give us a little bit more understanding of how you would describe it? And the words that are displaying are some of the things that we hear over and over again about the launch experience. Because oftentimes you're dealing with teams that have no previous experience, and it's not a positive experience for them. The worst description we ever had was, they would hope that there's no blood on the floor at the conclusion of the launch. So when we heard that, we knew that we would be able to definitely make a difference for them, and there definitely wouldn't be any blood on the floor. But based on that description, they haven't had very positive launch experience so far. And when you're looking at launch, you really understand that it is a complex process. There's a lot of moving pieces. You have to deal with all of your external partners in all different areas that affect your launch, potentially globally or in a certain region. And it's complicated enough doing it in one country, but when you add additional levels to the complexity, it just adds to it. And then bringing your entire organization together as well, that have to engage with each other as well as these external partners. It just makes it a much more complex, ever-changing process that really requires you to have strong communication and collaboration. And then you look at the timeline for launch, and every launch is different. So, you know, potentially, hopefully, you're 36 months out and you know that you'll be launching. But we all know that there's those launches that you find out that you have 6 months to launch. So based on what your need is, you really the first step is understanding that timeline. What are you working within in order to get that team that you need and effectively be able to execute your launch process? In the description that we're going to be looking at today, I'll be focusing mostly on products that will be launching in the 36 months to 18 months, but we certainly have experience working with the much shorter priority launches. So keep that in mind as you're thinking through the information in your own, in addition to who should be part of that launch. So based on your timeline, based on experience, who and how should they be engaged? Because you have all of those internal functional areas that you need to collaborate with, as well as you're going to have a multitude of external vendors that you need to collaborate with. And then within your own organization, you need to be reporting to your managers, your senior management, the executives, and then outward to regions and other countries in your global organization as well. So how do we understand all of those workflows, the timing, so that all of those resources can be optimized? Because as I've already mentioned, there's a lot of functions involved and they have to be able to work together. There's cross-functional work streams that have to be collaborated with. There's a lot of dependencies that we need to understand and track. So you need to really have a good understanding of what that flow of information needs to look like so that you can pinpoint at what point in time certain individuals, certain departments need to be brought into your organization. And some are going to be brought in earlier and be able to leave prior to launch. Some are with you throughout the entire timeline. Some really come in more post-approval. So you need to take a look at that as you're planning out your launch to understand how we can move forward. And the other part to keep in mind is not every organization has an entire department for each of these work streams. They might have one individual that's managing multiple work streams within each of these areas, but these are all of the areas that have work that needs to get done. So you need to think through who are these multiple hats, who are these individuals, or potentially you need to resource who these people will be. And again, depending on where you sit in the launch, do we need to look at this from a global, a regional, a country perspective, and how are we going to collaborate with each other? Are we going to have a global preparing the strategy with the regions and the countries optimizing that information and doing the tactical work? Or is it the larger market? So those are the things you need to understand first as you start to strategically think about your resources and your team and how you'll be moving forward with them. The first thing we really take a look at when we're working through a launch, as I mentioned, is that timeline to understand better for our clients and ourselves, what is that timeline and where's the sweet spot that we're going to be working in? Is it the 36 months? Is it 18 months, 12 months, 6 months? But when are you expecting approval, or are we just launching? And when are you expecting your sales force to start engaging? Once we have those key pieces of information, then we can really start to put it all together as far as the governance. Because you have to look at all of it. You need to understand what your product is going to be doing. You need to see how that fits into your franchise as a whole. You need to understand the geography of the launch structure, and then all of the functions and departments that are available to you to execute those critical work streams as part of your launch. Because all of these pieces have to come together to provide your alignment, your collaboration, critical communication, and the transparency as a whole of how we're progressing forward and when people are going to be becoming part of the team and what their key responsibilities are going to be. So as I mentioned, our first step really, after we understand those key pieces of information, is to establish what the launch governance is going to look like. So the model I have listed here is a simplified version of your executive team, a core launch team, and then your extended launch team with your cross-functional working groups. And I do caution you to keep it as simple as possible. Sometimes you need to have additional governance committees involved here, but don't make it so complex that the people that are actually doing the work have confusion who they need to escalate or who they need to get approvals or where they need to go to get key pieces of information to complete their tasks. You want to make sure that each of your points in your governance tree has a clearly defined role and responsibility. And as much as possible, try to eliminate duplication of team members in each of the teams. So you'll have some duplication, but try and make it as streamlined as possible, just so, one, everybody's not adding an additional meeting to their calendar that they don't need, but also to really help everyone with that understanding of escalation and change and where they're to be moving forward to in order to understand what their next steps are, or who should we be reporting or escalating items to. When you look at that executive launch team, they really need to be your advisors. They're looking at developing the brand strategy. They're setting the tone for the launch. They're aligning your entire organization and franchise to that launch, to the strategy, setting your launch objectives. And what I've seen most importantly is identifying who that brand or launch lead is going to be. This is the individual that's going to lead the entire team. They're going to ensure the execution of your strategy. This is a very important decision in addition to the decision to commercialize itself. The executive launch team ideally needs to be able to communicate the strategy effectively, and they're really there to remove those obstacles, get you the resources you needed in order to move forward with that strategy. And I've talked about how important identifying the launch lead is. This person is critical to the success of your launch because they really will set the culture for your launch. They are everything. They are motivating, they're the coach, they're the mentor, they're setting the vision, they're bringing the team together, they're engaging people to be participative. This saying that I have listed here, contrary to popular belief, there is most certainly an I in team. It is the same I that appears 3 times in responsibility. This launch lead needs to be responsible for all facets of the launch. They're not necessarily executing the tasks, but they're making sure that the individuals are there that can execute those tasks, and they have a very good understanding of this launch. One of the worst times we had with the launch was with an organization that siloed their launch, and they actually had the launch responsibilities divided up between 5 individuals. I can assure you that for them to have alignment was almost impossible. And the teams that reported to those individuals would be reporting to multiple team leaders. It was very hard on that team. There was very little alignment. The collaboration was happening, but it was happening not as a whole and broken down. So the communication kept breaking down. They scrambled at the end to meet their launch. So ideally, you have one individual that is your launch lead that's taking ownership for that launch. And they're going to be very good at communicating your team objectives, setting the tone and building excitement. They're going to be working with the executive launch team to bring that strategy down and communicate it to the rest of the team. And they need to have the ability to ask the tough questions. They need to have that capability to say, why are we red? What is the delay? What are we going to be doing to fix this? They can't just look at items and assume people are going to be taking care of it. They need to collaborate to solve for those solutions, but also have the capability of acknowledging positive, acknowledging success, and finding a way to reward that success. So where do you begin to build those launch teams? Again, the example I'm showing you is based on 36 months, so not everyone will have this ability to start working on a team so far out. But at 36 months out, you're really focused on strategy, so your executive launch team is what needs to be engaged, and they need to start thinking about that launch lead so he can get looped in as soon as possible. So what we'll do is we'll then move to 24 months where you want that launch lead to have started to really think about his core launch team and start pulling those key members together because they're sort of like your superheroes. You want to be able to send them out with their objectives so they can start getting the teams aligned and executing against this. Again, great communicators, but those that have the ability to listen, ask questions, and really work as a team to resolve any issues, identify risks, and move forward with your launch based on your plan. They need to be able to develop, execute, and manage both the teams and the tasks. And then your extended launch team, they're the doers. They're the task owners. They're the ones that are executing on that information, but they're going to be a tremendous resource as far as providing that ongoing input and information to the core launch team, so those issues and gaps can be easily identified and then bring awareness to what they are, as well as to their accomplishments and any new ideas. And again, based on the size of your organization, there's a potential that your core launch team and your extended launch team are the same individuals, but it just makes it that much more important then to make sure you have the right person doing the right job. And your cross-functional working groups, you're going to want to identify those cross-functional work streams that require team people, different resources, different departments to come together with an understanding of how they depend upon each other, how information feeds into each other, so that they can work together to execute those work streams on the agreed timelines. At the same time, continue to identify those gaps or any areas of concern, and then work together to resolve them or escalate it up to the core team for review. So how do you go about doing that, optimizing your team? How do you go about figuring out when to engage the right team members? And the way that you do that is really taking a look at your workflow. When do we need to be starting this work? Is it based off of when we expect to be getting approval? Is it based off of when we're expecting launch readiness? So what you want to do is first have agreement on how we're going to be mapping our activities. Are we mapping our activities based on our approval date? Are we mapping our activities based on when we'll be shipping product? Are we mapping our activities based on when we're going to be able to have sales force in the field selling? Once you have that understanding, you can then work with each of your work stream leads or your core team leads to start saying, when do these tasks have to start prior to that particular date in order for us to meet that date? And what we'll do is we'll look at each of those windows of opportunity and what those work streams are and who are the individuals that need to be involved at that point in time to execute those tasks. So we start breaking down the entire launch workflow by who are the individuals. And in the example I'm showing you here, we really took a look at it based on the RACI of who will be responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed through each of these bucketed areas based on the work streams that you're executing. So here in this example, you can see at 36 months out, accountable is your executive team. They're really focusing on the strategy, and you have your core executive team representing those core functional areas of clinical medical, finance, manufacturing, market access, marketing, and regulatory. And then you have your areas that you're going to need to consult on based on what your strategies are. And then you're going to start looping in your launch lead by identifying them so they can be involved as early on as possible, but they might not actually join the team in the 24th month. As we move to the 20th month, you can see accountable switches. So the accountability switches over to the core launch team because now we're executing on the strategy. Responsible is shifting to our extended team, and now our extended team is getting built out. We're adding additional layers. We're adding the people that are executing these tasks based on what we've planned in the previous slide. And we're also consulting with some new departments, such as government affairs, our MSL team, patient advocacy. But in the meantime, we're keeping our executive team informed as we go forward. So what you would do is you would lay out those scenarios throughout your entire launch cycle. So from 36 months to 0, I want to understand what are the work streams we're going to be executing, when we have to kick those off, and that's really going to dictate when you start to add those layers of resources in. If you're working under a much smaller timeline, or you have an organization with fewer departments or team members, same thing. How can we work through this so that we're engaging people at the right time? And it's about understanding those work streams that need to be executed, both for the product themselves, for the franchise strategy, for the geography that you're working within, and then the resources you have available to you, again, based on your organization size and the timing of the launch itself, so that you can start to bring in the alignment, the collaboration, the communication, and the overall transparency. So how do we get our team alignment? So now that we've talked through our governance, what that's going to look like, and how we start optimizing our resources to engage them when it's critical for executing those tasks, we need to give them that plan. So we've laid out when those critical work streams are going to be. Now we can start adding the details so that the teams will have that clear strategy and plan to execute against. And because we started to look at who's responsible and accountable for those tasks, they can go forward with a very understood plan that they can execute against. What's also very important is to understand what are those strategic tasks that we need to execute. What is the critical path of our plan here? What are the critical success factors for our brand? Because those are the ones you want to be focusing on. You don't want to have the team so focused in the day-to-day tasks that they lose sight of the big picture. So you want to be able to focus on those most urgent issues so that if there are any issues with them, you will be able to identify them quickly and then move through resolution. And it's important that as you're moving through the resolution, you're tracking that resolution. So one, you can understand that it actually worked, and two, making sure that it's actually getting done and taken care of. Some of the best teams we've worked with, one of the things that they'll do is they'll establish rules for collaboration up front. And this is really part of your team lead. They're going to be there saying, this is how I want us to work together. This is how I want us to collaborate. So oftentimes what they'll do is they'll create rules for collaboration. So some will use acronyms, as in this example with partner, performance, accountability, respect, teamwork, and transparency, no excuses, results. Or they'll use some type of platform to really call out team, this is where we work together, this is where our information goes, this is how we're going to have an understanding of who's responsible for what, so you can pull everyone together. So there's different ways of looking at the collaboration, but it is important for the team as a whole and also for your working groups to have that capability to collaborate as well as how to communicate, because communication goes hand in hand with collaboration. And oftentimes the teams, there's so many mechanisms for collaboration. You need to keep reminding them of we're a team, we're focused on the same goal, and this is how we're going to get there. Through alignment, because we have a clear strategy and plan. Through collaboration, because we're going to work together and be accountable to each other. And then through communication. So another example I can share with you here is one of our team leads would also change up their rules of communication. So they had fun with quotes, and every meeting that they would have, they would just share some new quotes with the team to make sure that they understood that, keeping together, working together is success, that you have to be a team player, and also make every action count. In teamwork, silence isn't golden, it's deadly. How many times have you been in team meetings and, everybody goes through their PowerPoints and everybody nods their head, but not a single question is asked. Nobody challenges any of the information that's being presented. So you have to get that engagement of your team to make sure everybody's understanding the role that they're playing in the big picture, and that it's important for us to actually speak up, challenge each other with timing in a positive way, not in an aggressive way, but there's ways to do things that you're fostering that collaboration in the communication. And as I mentioned, most organizations have multiple ways that you can communicate. And this is important because everyone sort of communicates in different ways, and they hear things or read things or understand things differently. So if you try and use as many communication platforms as possible, you're sure to capture your entire team. Whether you're communicating consistently in your launch team meetings, you're using your internal communication platforms, you're actually walking the halls and having conversations with individuals, jumping into meetings or sub-team meetings to see what's on the agenda and if you can provide any insight or help. Having that launch room where people can go to see what the latest Gantt chart looks like, or the latest promotional materials or objectives and how we're progressing. One of the teams we worked with, the team leader, the launch team leader, he would actually send out weekly updates, and they would be weekly updates from your team lead. He would share with them what was completed that week, what they should ramp up for next week, any new market research or findings that they might have said, and he would also put pop quizzes into them. So it was a way for him to communicate out with the team, keep everybody aware, but also engage them for conversations that they can use with each other as the team. And all of this speaks to transparency, because oftentimes what we found with working these launch teams, they understood their task, they understood what they needed to do. They didn't necessarily know how it fit into the big picture, or how there were dependencies to what they were executing, that other individuals or departments needed to take their work in order to start or complete theirs. So having some type of platform that would provide you with that big picture awareness and knowledge sharing also gives an opportunity for some recognition and an ease of issue resolution. If you can have a way to quickly identify through traffic lights or some other reports or dashboards, how can we identify those issues and what are we doing to resolve them? And then managing change, because as we all know, there certainly is change that you'll have throughout your launch, whether it's changing dates or individuals or team members. You still need to work through what that transparency is going to look like. So once you apply all of these methods, and then you ask your team afterwards, so can you describe your launch experience? What we found is the tone of the words becomes much more positive. They're much more engaged. They found it a positive, rewarding experience. It's still complex. It's still stressful, but it was much more positive because it became a partnership. It became a collaborative environment. They were able to work more strategically with their fellow team members, and they had a much more clearer understanding of the role that they played as they moved forward. So it really was a much better experience for them. Being able to have that structured launch management, right? Establishing your launch governance, identifying a strong brand team leader, building your launch teams aligned to objectives and timing, and then driving that alignment, collaboration, communication, and transparency. This really is key to optimizing your launch resources so that you have that understanding of when the activities need to be executed, and then how are we going to be executing against that, as well as escalating any of those issues or risks. And then making sure to keep awareness of the alignment, the collaboration, the communication, and the transparency. Alignment, again, for those clear roles and responsibilities so everyone can be working cross-functionally, as well as to collaborate with each other with a focus on what's strategically important or imperative to your brand, so that you can keep the team going on that most important path without having to focus on the individual details. That's not to say sometimes you don't have to get into the weeds or get into those details when you're investigating certain items, but making sure everyone understands what is most critical, what are the strategic imperatives we need to move forward with, and communicating everything out over and over again through different platforms, but do it in a way that it's participative as well as engaging. And that brings the transparency of an integrated launch plan. So everyone's not working in a silo focused on their individual tasks. They understand where they fit in the bigger picture, and having a single platform that is accessible for them to work through, to execute against, and then that brings awareness of their own activities to the rest of the team as well. Thank you for your time. I'm going to pause now for any questions.
Thank you so much, Lori, and thank you everyone for attending. If you do have questions, please submit them via the Q&A feature. We're going to hold off just a couple of minutes here, and once we receive your questions, we can continue the conversation. I don't know that there has been any questions received up until
Anthony,
now.
I got one question.
Yes, you do have one. Okay, wonderful.
So the one question I've just received is about engaging the teams during the launch team and how you incentivize them. So from our experience, what we've seen is most organizations have incentives within their organizations as far as providing points or paid time off days. So it's more acknowledging positive or exceptional new ideas. Some of our launch leads, what they would do is during the launch team meetings themselves, they would create activities that would promote engagement and then also be able to award for the completement. So they would have product quizzes or process quizzes, just 1 to 3 questions that they would ask individuals. And if you got a question right, then you were given candy or a gift card for Starbucks. Also for bringing new ideas. So if there was an issue or something that needed to be identified, then those individuals would also receive some type of incentive. And again, it was generally some type of internal point system, or they would have a gift card or candy.
Thank you, Lori. There is another question. Do we use a platform that provides for cross-functional team management?
We do. We have a platform here at QPharma that we use. It's called Titanium Launch. It allows all of your team members to have a single point of access for the launch plan itself, as well as any related materials, reports, and dashboards. So that is something that QPharma does provide and is accessible for any cross-functional team whether they're in a single country, a region, or global.
Thanks so much, Lori. I do believe that concludes our questions for today. Thank you once again for your participation. Stay tuned as QPharma does host thought leadership webinar series throughout the year. And thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.